So hello guys, welcome to Consult 101 live session. So this is module 3. So here we'll be discussing market entry cases. Today we have with us Ashish, who has got an placement offer from Auctus, which is a day 1.1 company. Also, I hope that you guys are all practicing with your case groups by now. That will be really beneficial for your case preparation. And with that, uh, let's start. So, Ashish.
Hi. Yeah, I'll
Yeah,
take over.
yeah,
All right, cool. We go to the next slide then.
yeah,
Fine. So I think for today's session, we'll be covering market entry. Those of you who had attended the previous sessions on guesstimates and profitability will find this quite convenient. But nonetheless, we'll do market entry from the scratch in today's session, right? So to give you a brief understanding of what market entry is, you are given a case wherein the company or the problem statement of the nature wherein something new in their business model has to be incorporated. Some examples to give you a context would be, let's say a particular company wants to enter a new geography, or they want to enter a new, they want to penetrate the market with a new product which is different from what they usually deal with. And another example could be, let's say they want to further widen or particularly target a new user segment. These are some ways you all can sort of try and understand what is the market entry procedure. Details of it we'll get into as we progress in the session today. So, right. So I think this is the structure that they've set for the session at the moment. We can move ahead to the next slide, I think. Yeah. So I think like it must be pretty apparent to those as well who are regular here is that any of these cases first begin with preliminary questions. You need to understand a basic idea of what and what direction you need to head in and what the case interviewer is exactly meaning for you in terms of the problem statement. So in a similar fashion, just started the entire process with the preliminary questions that you can sort of stick with. Of course, it's not going to be limited to these, but these could be ones which you should definitely try and scope out before you get into any of the nitty gritties of the problem, right? So, firstly, when there's a market entry kind of problem, let's say given X company needs to enter this geography, your first question should be, what is the objective of the market entry? Have they already identified a lucrative market? Are they trying to expand their reach for some particular reason? Is it purely profits driven, revenue driven, so and so? It would just make it very very clear right at the onset where you need to head with when you progress in this entire case framework. The next question is, when you are solving the case, you need to understand how are you going to evaluate, that the case, the market is viable or it is something you should do. So there has to be some key parameter, some key metric that will be utilized for evaluation. Examples of these, as mentioned, can be something like profit, revenue, payback period, etc. All of which we'll discuss moving forward. And again, this is something that you would ask, scope out, and have the interviewer set for you so that you know you're in the right direction. And lastly, is clarifications. Of course, this goes without saying. You need to be very, very sure you understand the problem statement very clearly. Any terms thrown around over there should be made very clear then and there. Yeah. Rohan, could you mute? It's a little bit of disturbance.
1 second. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks. Cool. So yeah, so that wraps up the clarifications part, and I think that would be common to any of your cases. They'll give you a problem statement. They will have loose terms over there. You need to take some time out. Make sure you understand terms. Run them by. Let's say your term is not very familiar. Explain. This is what I understand from this term. Is it right? Can I move forward with this assumption? And then you can go ahead. So that's going to be a preliminary before you get into the nitty-gritties of solving the case. So yeah, I think we can go ahead. Right. So now this entire market entry we'll break down into two segments. Firstly, is the market entry feasible? And later, which we'll come to, is going to be how and what will be the process of going forward with this process. So let's stick with the first one. To give you a brief understanding, we are trying to evaluate numerically, and you can say more from a very basic financial standpoint, whether this process is going to be worthwhile for the company or not. So cycling back to the very first thing, first objective we mentioned, right? If it's going to be something like profit, or the metric given to you is going to be the objective is to maximize profits. Here is a particular formula that you can sort of utilize, and it makes common sense once you go through it. You for the particular market. So again, when we say market, I think I'll just try and clarify that term as well. uh, let's say there's a company that is selling some particular thing, let's say washing machines, for example. Market size is going to, for that particular machine, is the number of units they can expect to sell, or another way of phrasing this is number of potential customers for that particular you know commodity that is a product. Like here it's going to be washing machines, of course, but that is the basic understanding of market size. Then you have a market share. That if so, imagine market size as a pie. You can, as a company, you can strive to achieve a segment or a section of the pie, a slice, you could say. So that's going to be market share. What percentage of the entire market can you strive to capture? Maybe right now it's going to be for the initial standpoint, but you get an idea, right? It's not that as a company you can cater to the entire market, you will capture to a particular segment of it. That's what is captured in market share. Then you'll have your profit per unit. So market size and market share collectively give you the total number of units you expect to sell, right? So now if you want to understand the total profit that you're making, you need to multiply with profit per unit. The units cancel out perfectly. You will get the left hand three terms dissolve and settle down to basically profit. uh, and then so this is the first aspect. And notice, so I'll explain what are the smaller red boxes. I think that'll be better. So you might have done guesstimates until now. Market size in most cases will lead to a guesstimate. You'll have an entire, you'll do a population approach, a supply based approach, of course depending on the problem, but you'll usually have to use a guesstimate to understand the overall market size. Market share, on the other hand, you'll have to understand what is the entire competitive landscape. You'll speak with the interviewer, what is the market share they can strive, they think they can practically achieve. If not, you list a couple of parameters and state this is why I go with X assumption. You'll see this as we go in the cases, but that is a bit of a discussion phase. Profit per unit is nothing but revenue minus cost. Again, similar to your profitability framework, and again, it's basics of profits. It's revenue minus cost, and all of this will be per unit. So these are your per unit finances in this term of profit per unit. Now fixed cost is, this is something that you would necessarily need to factor in, because when a company is doing a new venture, invariably they're going to have to pool in some amount of resources monetarily. Let's say, it could be the investment, it could be new infrastructure they need, the land for it, the technological capabilities. Just to give an example, those are going to cost them something which is going to be a one-time cost for setting up this new venture of theirs, and that is what we are trying to capture in the last term for fixed costs. So if you do this quick math in some time, going through obviously all the processes, you will start to understand what is the profit of this entire venture. So this formula basically gives you the profit of this new venture that you're going for, and that can be, yeah, evaluated, and that can be used for evaluation. Now, couple of other terms that can be understood. So, I would say in the metrics, this explains the profit. Let's say if they want to only understand the revenue front, all you need to do is drop all the cost factors. So, a simplification is already presented on your screens right now. In your profit per unit category, you drop the cost, fixed cost gets dropped. So, you're left with basically market size times market share times revenue per unit. I think this should be pretty straightforward. Now, the other part is, let's say if we observe the first formula. um, let's say we take the profit per unit and try and estimate that what they can expect in a year, right? That will tell us the first term in a single year's period. And now, if I say that the payback period is something like n, so n times the annual profit that you can expect, if you equate it to fixed cost, that would roughly give you the payback period. Of course, you're not taking time value of money and all that into account, but that's not necessary for you to get into all these complexities, because you need to understand at a case level, you are doing it on pen and paper in front of them. You can't get into such exponential calculations. So right now, let's go very basic. What is the number of years that your profit will be able to recover the fixed cost that you're pulling in for that new venture? That is what you're trying to solve, and this helps you identify the payback period once all the other variables are set in place. Again, if the context is a bit late, let's just wait for the case, but this is a basic idea. Another one aspect that is to be really thought of is, uh, when you get these values, let's say in the first case, you calculate the profit, you calculate the revenue if that is required, and even do the payback period, you need to understand whether this is acceptable. Because see, at an absolute scale, it's very difficult to say. Let's say you get your calculations, you get something like $5 million per year, or your payback period is 5 years. It becomes difficult to understand, right, whether that is a good number or a bad number. So, firstly, you should try and see whether in your preliminary questions or so far, have they ever dropped a hint towards what kind of ballpark figures they're looking for? That will tell you what they're expecting. Let's say they're saying that our venture should make us profitable to about 5 million per year or something like that, then you can plug in those numbers. Or they say that our basic idea is within 5 years we should be able to recover our money. That tells you that you need to map your payback period and see whether it works out. If these are not given and they're like, okay, we don't have any set targets in mind, the next best thing you can do is benchmark these results. Now, where will you benchmark it? You'll either say that a competitive company out there, what is their kind of profits or revenues that they hit in a year. You can kind of evaluate whether we are on the right track or not with that. Alternatively, you can also benchmark with other subunits, because invariably, as the name suggests, new market, it's a market entry. You are going to have an existing product in a lot of cases, especially in the case when the company is trying to open a new wing. You say, what are our current profits, what are our current other segments profits being, so then you can understand. Let's say if they you are getting a profit of $5 million per year, which seems quite lucrative, but every other product or every other vertical of the company is making a profit of, let's say, 100 million or something at average. This might not be the best case, and you can just point it out. You don't need to make a conclusion at this point, but that's how you get a make some more sense out of the pure numbers you've gotten, because it becomes obviously difficult to dictate anything there. So I think this is the basic idea where we're trying to say in the first part of your you know market entry, where you're doing the financial and mathematical feasibility. We'll go to the next slide one. Right. So now we'll talk about the entry strategy, right? So let's say in the first case, you do understand that it's worthwhile on a very basic financial front. It makes sense that we should go ahead with it. Now the question comes, how will we go about entering this market, right? What is going to be the strategy per se? So one of the approaches, of course, now here in this area, because it gets a bit subjective and qualitative, there are multiple approaches. Here I'm just trying to illustrate one of the approaches that there is to tackle the strategy case. So that is basically is the value chain analysis. What is value chain? It is the entire process that a company or a product has to go through, right from its inception, or right from its raw material to getting to the customer's place. That entire thing can be broken down into particular steps, and that's your value chain. Any company may or may not be in every aspect of it. Like there could be a company that is purely a manufacturer. They go to other companies or they rely on other companies for distribution, marketing, etc. There could be a company that is solely like a marketing company, for example, will not have the prior components of your value chain, understandably. So I'll just firstly go over with the value chain here and get back to the discussion. So here the very basic value chain is going to be restricted to the three terms, the very central three terms you can see: manufacturing, distribution, marketing. I think if you can picture this out, it would seem quite straightforward as well. The product needs to first be developed and created into a finished product. Uh, as in, obviously, you're going to have a lot of components or raw material depending on where you are, and then it will be developed in a particular factory unit. You'll have the manufacturing process. Then you will have your distribution, how it is reaching the customer. Is it through you, through other outlets? Is it going to be our own stores? Is it going to be external stores? And who's going to do the logistics involved in it? Then you're going to have your marketing. How is this product put out there in front of the customers? These are the main three steps. Depending on how your product is and where your problem is headed, you can add few finer steps and questions in between. Like an example I've given you for distribution and marketing. Some other steps is manufacturing is closely tied in with procurement. Where are you getting your raw materials from? Are they easily accessible? Like let's say if the company wants to enter a new geography, is that place going to be able to provide the necessary raw material? Questions like that can be included in the scope of this area, because that's what you'll have to pick a little bit based on context. Similarly, on the other end of the spectrum, after marketing, some particular products also entail an after sales service, which becomes quite pivotal. Like let's say you're selling mobile phones to a new market. It also is equally important for you to set up sufficient number of stores, and you know your after sales service, like your warranty and your service centers and all of that. Those are equally important, and to give you a holistic idea of whether this market should be entered or not, right? So within each, what we're trying to say is, we'll ask the company that where all do you see some. They could simply say that, okay, we're going through all the values of the value chain. Everything is going to be relevant for us. What you can also try and analyze through discussion. This is all going to be a discussion with your interviewer. So you can try and understand which of these components would you want to do in-house. In-house as in the company will do it themselves. Which of them they would want to outsource. Let's say they want to enter this new geography. They're based in India. They want to enter Sri Lanka, for example. Will they directly go there? Will they outsource some of the work, some of these steps to some other companies, things like that? Or, of course, another version of outsourcing really is going to be whether they want to collaborate or partner with another firm. which is going to smoothen their entire process. So these are a few sort of terms and ideas you will go through every step of the value chain. Try and discuss: do we have the capabilities to do it ourselves? If not, these are some options I can present to you. A footnote here again I've tried to leave is about your geography. You need to be always mindful, like whenever you're entering a new, especially in the new geography problems, it makes sense that you're entering a new geography, but it's not necessary all of the steps of the value chain need to be done there. I think that should be also pretty clear. It's not necessary you need to manufacture there. So all those nuances you need to just keep in mind when discussing with the interviewer, so that they also understand that you are thinking of all the possibilities. So that explains the value chain analysis. Then another factors that you need to be wary of throughout and also bring up in discussions with the interviewer at this stage is: are there any particular barriers to entry, or are there any sort of threats that you can see which could make, like, although we have done the financial analysis, it makes sense to get there, but are there any other hiccups you're expecting when we practically go on ground? So a couple of examples and like, this is just a small technique you might see where you use an anagram for all the options. It's pastel. These are some of the verticals through which you can think are relevant. So it's political, economic, social. I'll go through one example. Let's say if you're talking about a particular case wherein the oil being supplied for the nation, they're trying to change their supplier from, let's say, UAE to another neighboring country. That you need to factor in the political condition. You should say that, is there going to be any political uprising against this, or are there any legal boundings we have? So that is going to be the political aspects. Economics again depends on the entire situation. Slightly ties in with the finances, but you will get there eventually. Social is how receivable. Like, let's say in the case where you're trying to introduce a new product to the market, are the customers really wanting it? How are they going to receive this entire idea? That's covers in the social. Technical capability is you are expanding at any level. Can your current manufacturing lines support the expansion, the higher requirement? So that those all come under technical capabilities, right? Can you actually go ahead, and are you technically robust already to take that challenge on? Environmental is again something you obviously have to think about. Different countries have different environmental laws. So when you're coming into a new government, or let's say in discussion, it's already clear to you need to set up factories there. So now you need to think twice whether can we actually do it. Are there emission constraints we need to be aware of, and further put in more resources to take that into account. Lastly is legal. Legal is like what all regulations are implied, regulations on a general sense. So this is something you'll have to be mindful at every stage, be it in the value chain also, as to what components you can do or not. At the end, you can synthesize it, and also if you notice in market share, these factors affect how much of the market share also you can strive to capture. Again, I know it might be a lot of terms right now. It will all tie in when we go with an example, but this basically is, I would say, what you need to go through when doing a market entry. You have you did the financial aspect. Now you're talking about how your strategy and entire process would be, and yeah, that would be the basic, you could say, sort of the theory. And I would really want to make one thing very clear: this is one of the approaches. Whenever you're talking about cases and frameworks, there are multiple out there. You need to see what is you are most comfortable with and what you have found to be working for you to reach the solution in the best possible manner. So this is one particular framework there. This is what I had personally used, so I'm comfortable with this. Is I'm putting it forth. It's quite in line with cases interview cracked. If anyone's gone through those videos as well, but yeah, this is some framework which works. It seems pretty relevant to engineering college consult interviews. So wherein a significant focus is going to be on the numbers uh, fa- uh, part of the entire process. So yeah, this is a bit of the theory. I think Rohan would want to add something here.
Yeah, so basically, I would like to just like summarize in brief. So, I would again like to emphasize, like, even in the previous session and in this session, Ashish used a very structured approach to solve this case. So, it's true not only for market entry but for any case or guesstimate. Structured approach is one of the most important things which will be required for your interview. So, for market entry, like, if we think logically, first of all we need to understand if like if the entry itself is feasible, like even if like we try, will it work out or not. So for that we try to make a structure about like how big is the market, and then how much market share we can expect and stuff like that, then how many profits we expect. So based on what benchmarks to use, as far I know, I think it's more or less dependent on your interviewer. Like, be in constant communication with your interviewer and it will all work out. And after the feasibility has been proved, for the strategy part, again, Ashish has broken down into a well-defined structure, what that is manufacturing, then distribution, and then marketing. So basically, this structured approach really helps more than the final answer, and also like considering different kinds of barriers will actually give more depth to your analysis. So that will kind of like show the interviewer that you also think about the possible threats and how to combat them. So yeah, so even if it feels intimidating at first, it's basically about having a structured approach. So I mean, do you want to add anything, Ashish?
Yeah, I think it's a good thing you pointed out about the structured approach because, in particular, in this particular aspect, in this particular type of cases of market entry, it's easy to go a bit haywire if you do not have one because there are just too many factors that are bubbling all around. Whether should you enter, should you not? What are the aspects? What is the competitive landscape? All of that, like if you just approach it preemptive, like without any understanding, you will get an answer, but it might not be as structured. It won't be as clean, and you have a risk of missing out points. So just going through a structure that makes sense to you at the end of the day and you are sure is exhaustive is the best way out. And always go from a higher level to the granularity. Like even if you notice in the value chain, right now what you're presented here, manufacturing, distribution, marketing, is the higher level. Of course, each of them has subdivisions. Manufacturing has other steps. So we're trying to go with an overview. Depending on how the discussions go, you will drill down on a particular topic. That's always a format of cases interviews. You start at a higher level. Once you know that that is something the interviewer wants you to take up, get the cue, and then go into the depths of it. So yeah, I think that is it. I would say if it's all right, Rohan, let's take a couple of minutes. If anyone has doubts up until here, let's clarify them before we get started on the case. The case will be it won't be a proper interviewee format of the case. I'll just discuss it out with you all and this is the problem, this is how we're going to solve it out. But nonetheless, at this point, if any of you all have any queries, I would like to address them right away so that it would help make the next process a bit smoother. So we'll probably take a 2 to 5 minutes for queries and we'll continue. You can just unmute, I think, and speak. So,
Yeah, sure. Like any question, that's fine.
Hello.
yeah, hi.
So I have a basic question. So,
No
what is the
worries.
difference between value chain and supply chain? I have seen the same terms in both the things.
Um, I would say they are interchangeably used because the supply chain, from my understanding, is utilized more in the FMCG landscape, more particularly when you have commodities, and you have the entire process where they procured, manufactured, distributed. So that is where I contextualize supply chain, but it becomes a bit difficult to visualize them for different kind of products. Let's say you are solving a case for Flipkart or something. It might not be as easy to visualize supply chain, so I think it's interchangeably used, but value chain, the process is more or less the same. It's covering the breadth of the business at the end of the day. It's just a blanketing term. As long as you understand the crux of it, it's all right. You can also
Okay.
give it a read, but again, I would not advise you to spend too many hours on this. Getting a basic understanding and understanding why we're doing this is good enough.
Okay. Understood. Thank you.
And yeah, others also can just feel free to ask questions. I can understand the terms are new, so absolutely don't be have doubts whether you should ask or not. It's completely understandable in the first time if terms don't make sense. So feel free to ask. We can always ask at a later point in time also. So yeah, we'll wait for a minute or two, else we'll proceed. Okay, I think Rohan will proceed in that case.
Yeah, yeah, fine.
Yeah, good. So we'll go to the next slide. Okay. So a little bit background about before I start this case. For market entry cases, like as you all might have multiple sources of material already shared with the case club, I did not want to exhaust any of that material. So this case is a little bit of a derivative of the case I was actually given by Auctus during my interviews on campus. So that's where this case is sourced from, and I'll walk you through this case in the next segment of today's session. Right. So I'll start with just reading out the question for you all. So it's basically your client is an electrical equipment manufacturer. They want to use their expertise to enter the market for industrial cabling. It should be cabling, but yeah. So suggest if and how they should go about it. So this is the kind of statement that you can expect your interviewer to give to you at the very onset of the case, and that is it. So now it's up to you to scope the problem further and go about it. So I'll just go through each of the preliminary questions and tell you what kind of answers you can expect. So first part, you need to try and understand what exactly does the company do, because at least in my case for electrical equipment manufacturing, you do understand loosely what they do, but what segment they are in, who do they cater to. These are kind of questions you can bring up so that you understand your current client clearly enough, and then see how the things progress. So at here, the kind of answer I got was the client was a company that manufactures and supplies components of industrial machinery or equipment. So that was the answer to the first question I received. So now, to me, it was clear what the client does in its current state. Then, of course, the next question is going to be, if we are trying to enter this cabling industry, uh, what do we mean by that? What is the objective? So what the answer I got from the interviewer was, it seems like an easy step up from the current business they have, and also lucrative market. So they wanted to firstly evaluate, and they really feel that it might help drive their profitability moving forward. So here, in terms of the metrics to evaluate, I need not go back to a question of asking what is the metric. I clearly understand they're concerned about the profits. So I know I would probably use a statement to the interviewer such as that, from what I can understand, we would like to evaluate the success of this new venture in terms of the profit it's making, and you get an affirmative from the interviewer and you move forward. So a couple of more questions in this domain can obviously be asked. You can ask what do you mean by cabling industry, or any other aspects of the terms thrown around which are not confident. Absolutely feel free to ask them, because even they also understand that you're hearing this for the first time. You need to be sure that you don't have a wrong perception. Let's say if you're 50-50 on a particular term, you say in cabling industry, see there's industrial cabling mentioned. So you should say, are you targeting providing cables for industries alone? And the interviewer will correct you or just say that yes, you're on the right track, please proceed. So make use of preliminary questions to get a basic understanding of the whole case, and at least the main crux of what has been given to you right now, and then move forward. You don't want to start with any false information. So yeah, that is it for the preliminary questions here. You know what kind of business they currently do, what they want to get into, what is their objective. In this case, it's purely profits, and you already hence know the metric for evaluation, which is going to be profit. So now naturally we'll move on to the first part, assessing the viability, the financial viability of this entire venture. So we start the usual route. I give them an overview. How I would like to evaluate the profits is going to try and understand the profit of this venture, and subtract the fixed costs that this could incur on the particular, for the company. And the profit itself are going to be evaluated as a function of market size, market share, and the profit per unit. And getting a green signal from the interviewer, I proceeded. So let's go through each of the verticals individually and how you would estimate it. So let's talk about the market size right now. uh, you'll have to solve this. So there are two ways. Interviewer might say, okay, see, market size. See, I'll just give you a little bit of context here. The interviewers actually drive the entire flow of the case quite significantly. They know which part they want you to spend a lot of time in. So let's say they don't really want to check your guesstimate skills here, they will just give you the market size directly. However, if they do want you to go through that process, or even they might tell you to just give us a structure for now, don't do the numbers of it. These are a couple of ways it could play out, but you obviously need to be prepared for it. So be prepared to do a guesstimate at the market size. Obviously, that's how it's going to roll. So here, what do you mean by market size? It's going to be the market size of the entire for a cable industry. So here I had a straight away question for him. How do we define market size for cable? For cable, he was saying it's going to be length. What kind of length of cable are you expecting the market to have a demand for? So that was something that is pretty important here, because what are the units? Like if it's going to be, let's say, washing machine, you can understand it's going to be 10 units, 20 units. In cabling, I needed to be very clear how I need to evaluate the market. He said length, that is what I had to proceed with. So the approach that I went with is, firstly, assessing the number of industrial units or factories that are present in the country. Again, this was another clarification I had done until this point. And what is our current geography? Where do we want to expand to? He was like, we operate in India currently. We want to expand also within Indian boundaries. So here, when I say number of factories or units, I was trying to get an idea of how many units are there, factories are there in India. Second aspect is once I do know the number of factories, I will find the cable length that each of these factory units are utilizing. Multiplying the two, obviously, I'll get the total cable length demand for the country. If it's clear till here, I'll break it down further how it was done. There are two parts of this guesstimate. First one is how do you assess the number of industrial units? Once again, I'd like to clarify there are multiple ways of doing it. Probably we can spend some time looking at alternative approaches at the end. But here, what I've done is since I took a minute, of course, at that time during the interview, wanted to see how I can structure it. The way I chose to go ahead with it. I was trying to understand how many people are going to be employed in a factory role. Once I do have that number in place, I would be able to understand the number of factory units by dividing with an approximate factory capacity. Once that is in place, of course, I'll go to the second part. So here, obviously, now you've gone through the guesstimate series of the sessions, or just have gone through estimates. Basically, you need to break down the problem to be able to estimate. So you start. In my case, some of the factors that I considered, I started with the population at the very highest level. Then I split it into urban and rural because I felt this split would actually introduce a lot of differences in behavioral patterns. So when I say behavioral patterns, the number of people who I could imagine to be associated with the factory kind of jobs, that fraction might understandably be different in urban and rural. You expect more people to be doing that in the rural front because a lot of factories themselves are located more on the rural front. Similarly for urban, you will expect lower numbers. So this bifurcation makes sense. You justify it. That's why you're doing this bifurcation. And then go the metrics. Usual split is 70-30. You get the population of urban and rural. Then age barrier. Now, when you're talking about the number of people who are employed in factories, they are necessarily going to be of the age group of 20 to 40 or 20 to 50. You're not going to have people sub 20, very unlikely to have people above 50. So age barrier further helps to narrow down the problem. Makes sense. So try and estimate the number of people in the particular age unit that you have defined in both urban and rural parallelly. Get the number of people in your age group. Now, a gender barrier, or you could say a bias that you need to introduce. Uh, Amongst the people in this particular age group, let's say on the urban or rural, what fraction of them do you think are going to be males and females? We have the 50-50 who are more likely to be working in factories. If you see some particular trend that if you feel it, depending on the problem, it's equally likely, say so. Personally, you can say from experience, factories tend to have more male workers for even the more laborious factories. That is a valid point to state out, obviously stated out in very politically correct ways, and say that the tendency of more male workers is but natural. So you will, let's say, I'll only try and estimate from the male population the number of people. That's also a fair assumption. Just back everything up with this assumption. So like I said, in rural it's quite unlikely women are going to be employed in it, so I would just directly factor my number by twice. And because there's a small component there, it's fair to neglect. The interviewer said that's fair, so you can just drop that. So based on that, I went on narrowing down, and then of course I came to the income state. I based on which income category they belong to. We have the so as you get more and more comfortable with cases, you will have some predefined numbers in your mind. You will know these many fraction of people are in the below poverty line, these many people are above, these are the upper class. So you're going to try and identify upper class segment of people because they are only going to be possible to be working in the factory units. You don't sorry, I mean just like that, but you'll have to put weightages basically. Sorry, I got a bit digressed here. I'll repeat. You have your population, you get urban rural split, age barrier, this you get to some number. Now you segment them by income. Within every income segment, try and find out what fraction of them are likely to be working in factories. You'll get that number and you result in the total number of people working in factories. I hope I'm clear in this reiteration here. So once you have the number of people working in a particular factory, you divide that by the average factory capacity. Here again, this seemed a bit too abstract for me. So I had a discussion with the interviewer that from my perception of a factory, I would expect somewhere around 50 to 100 people to be working. Obviously, your higher management are going to factor in five. So let's just say, 100-ish, 75 to 100-ish people seems good. He was like, that's a fair number. And that's what is the average factory capacity I went with. Divided the number of people, I got the number of units. This is the logical flow and flowchart I went with, of course plugging in numbers at every standpoint. Once I had that, I come to the second part of the problem, right? How do I estimate what is the cable length going to be utilized by each of the factory units, which I'll multiply with the number achieved earlier. So the way I can visualize this is I try to estimate what will be the number of equipment present in the unit, what are the number of cross connections you can expect to happen. Let's say there are about 5 units. You would expect each of them to be connected. If you go with that assumption, you can do something like a 5C2 connections or something of that sort. You'll get the total number of cross connections that are there. Now, what is going to be the length of each connection? If you do that multiplication, you should be able to get the cable length. That seems quite fine, I would say. So once that is in place, you get the total length per unit, which is your last term here. Multiply with that with the number of athletes gotten in the earlier thing, you get the total number of cables that are required in a year. You that defines your market size so far. I think a lot of terms thrown around here. Let's take a minute. If anyone has any questions, you can use the chat or unmute yourself. And also at the same time, before I proceed, I would also want to take a minute and see if anyone would want to try out giving a different structure for the guesstimates. I think it would be a good exercise at this point in time because I'll have gone through guesstimates as well. So if there's any other structure, we can go over it if you all are up to that. Otherwise, we'll proceed. We'll just take a minute or two if anyone volunteers. Else, we'll proceed. Fair enough. I think Vishnu, can you just show me? Sorry, Rohan, can you show me the next slide? Okay, yeah. So market share is here. Great. So now, coming back to the main structure, I have discussed about the guesstimate that helped me estimate the market size in totality. Now I have to be multiply that with the market share. This is again something which is very qualitative. I had to discuss with the interviewer. The points that I was given is that in this particular cabling industry, this is what the interviewer shared with me. There are very few strong players that are present, but at the same time, there's not much differentiation that any of the providings have, which makes it equally likely for this new company to get into the market, which seemed like a fair landscape. So I said that let's say there are about 9 or 10 good players out there. We can say that we can strive to achieve a 10% market share, given that we already have a name for ourselves in the industrial area. He said that that's a fair, line of thought. So go ahead and stick with your 10%. So getting the affirmation of the interview is pretty important for your aligned, because let's say you out of the blue feel for whatever reason that you have stated 50%, they'll correct it. They'll correct you saying that okay, this might be a bit too high. Here are the reasons. You course correct depending on what the interview says, and it's absolutely fine. Don't be very concerned if your first guess is not exactly on track. It is but nature that it's a new industry for you, and every industry is going to be slightly new, to be very honest. So it's completely all right. Just try and back it up with sufficient reasoning, and it will work out. Like, to be very honest, in some of my cases, I said the market share we can expect is 20-25 based on what data he was given. He was like, no, you're being too ambitious, go with 10%. And that's all right. So I reduced it down to 10% and I stuck with it. So those are also issues that can happen, and it's completely all right. Just keep communicating with your interviewer all through, and you will be on the right track. So yeah. So recapping, market size was gotten, market share is gotten, multiply by 2, I get multiply the 2, I get it. Now it comes to profit per unit. I asked, are we aware about what kind of profit per unit are we expecting? He was like, don't worry about the calculations there, we have the value. He gave that to me, I did the math, I got the profit for this entire venture by multiplying these three terms. Now coming to the fixed costs, I said that now since we are setting up a new industry, of course it's going to cost us some amount. He was like, you can take a blanketing cost of 1 million US dollars. I was like, fair enough. I had the numbers, the subtraction, the number was greater than, and it was non-negative. I was like, that's a good sign. What is our current profits that the company is making? This seemed like around 1/3 of that. So I think seems like a good enough value addition, right? If you have your company making X, and this new venture's profit in a year itself is seeming to be X by 3, that's a very good addition to the company. So I think at the face of it, this looks good. I think we can discuss into further aspects. And the interviewer himself drove the conversation towards it. Fair enough. Let's now start discussing about how we'll go and enter. So I brought up the whole concept of value chain. I was like, the way I see it, there are three verticals mainly: your manufacturing, distribution, marketing. Where all do we see ourselves playing? I broke it down one at a time. Like I presented manufacturing time. And like in this front, what do you think are the challenges we face? He said very clearly that currently this kind of product seems to be aligning quite heavily with what we are already doing. We are already making parts of machineries. This makes sense. So manufacturing side, we shouldn't have challenge. We might have to upskill it, and all those costs are already factored into your the initial blanketing cost you gave. So manufacturing was taken care of. Distribution, here like again the same network works pretty well. Marketing, I asked him a simple question that are you intending to restrict your user base to current customers and provide cables additionally, or do you want to be open to new markets as well, as in just be a new supplier? Because like going back to the very crux of it, they were supplying components to particular industries for machinery. So I think, do you want to restrict it there, or you want to make it a large scale? They're like, it's large scale. So then I had to bring up that you need to start considering having a very proper marketing strategy. You need to start, your marketing team should be adept enough to take this on, understand the geographies involved. So this could be an area that needs some thought. And they're like, it's good that you pointed out that this is an area that needs to be focused on in the implementation. Then that was it. And then I also brought up the barriers for entry, coming back to the previous. So from the previous anagram, if you all remember Pastel, I felt these three were most relevant. Legal, I brought up legal very particularly here because I said now that we have figured out the financial stability, we have figured out the value chain, we need to try and understand what are the legal and the regulations involved. Because when you're talking about something like industrial cabling, quite naively speaking, also you can understand there would be a body in charge who will tell you that these are the specifications. You need to be certified to be able to provide it to the industry. So I think that needs to be factored in. Those costs need to be factored in, and be sure that we can, get those rights for ourselves to be able to do it. So that is an additional step the company needs to keep in mind, and that was something that was highlighted. And it is necessary that you bring about such things. Technical capabilities, although it seemed like it's aligned, I brought up the point that scale is something you need to think about. We should have the infrastructure being able to dedicate it for this entire product. So although we have a technical capability, we should also have the scalability. So he was like, that aspect is something that they hadn't thought of. So good is brought up. So it will always be, these objective points, and they'll be like, we've made a note of it, or it's a good point, or they'll tell you that no, don't worry, this is taken care of. So you're just trying to iterate through all the possibilities and see nothing is missed. And in a similar front as legal, I brought up environmental, because when you're talking about factories, when you're talking about something dealing with plastics, you need to be careful about the environmental laws involved. So, your factories should be able to handle all of that. So at this point in time, the interviewer was like, you have covered the breadth of it. This is good enough. Please provide your synthesis. A sample synthesis for y'all would be, how I would present it is, given the nature of the problem, we are talking about for our particular clients to enter the cabling industry, doing a basic feasibility analysis, we have found the profit, and that being a very significant contribution to the overall profits of the company, it seems worthwhile at the face of it. We went through the entire value chain. Marketing seems like one of the areas that we could need some help in, as well as a couple of things to be wary of moving forward is scalability, legal requirements, both in terms of regulation, certifications, as well as environmental laws. This was my synthesis for the case. That's where the interview was wrapped up, or at least the case aspect was wrapped up. So, yeah, I think this would be the crux of it. I have a couple of more aspects to cover moving forward, but yeah, this is the overall overview of how market entry case goes. Of course, do keep in mind I've skipped over the gory numbers. That is going to take some more time, and which is why this case can take a lot of time. Be prepared for that. 30-40 minutes is expected because you're basically doing a guesstimate. You might, those of you who are comfortable with profitability, or might notice traces of profitability concepts utilized earlier, where I was talking about revenues and costs. So it takes time for this case. Don't be concerned about that. So just to give you an overview of how it's going to work out. So yeah, this is it. Uh, Again, if there's any queries, you all can feel free to ask something right now. Else, we'll go into some more complexities that are involved. Yeah, I think someone's unmuted. Go ahead. All right, fine. So, yeah, I think we can proceed, Rohan. Show us the next slide.
Actually, this is the last slide. So, like, if you want, you can like verbally explain the complexity part,
Oh,
if
all right.
possible.
Fair enough, fair enough. Sure, I'll just get that. Okay, so let me just tell you which slide to keep on top. Okay, so can you go to the prior slide then? Okay, so now a couple of complexities that can come into the picture. Now that you'll have understood the prior process, sometimes what happens is the fixed costs that is there, they won't give you directly in the interview. They will say, what do you think are the kind of fixed costs that we might incur in doing such a venture? So they don't expect you to evaluate the costs, but tell you what are the verticals. So here, the kind of verticals that I could think of, or that's what I presented over there, is one is going to be your R&D. What is research and development that you need to go into do? try and understand what are the regulations that are going to involve, what are the price of procuring all those certifications for going forward in this industry. Second, manufacturing line. Although we have the capabilities, we might have to add equipment, we might have to add more staff, skilled people, we might have to create a small factory or scale up our production line. That's going to cost something. So that's another cost. Distribution marketing network in a similar fashion, I questioned them. On distribution side, do you think our current distribution network is going to be sufficient? Will we need additional lines so I can take 0.5% of the current cost we incur? Similarly for marketing. So here, that is why, if you had have noticed earlier, I said the part two is something you need to be very aware of all throughout. Because if thrown a question such as this, that you don't know the fixed cost, what are the components that you can be expecting to look at? Here are some of the components that you might have to present, which goes over, you can see basically the value chain, barriers, all of that has been tied in here. Of course, you'll take your time for it. Like, and if an interview asks you, tell him, can I get a minute to collect my thoughts? I pictured the value chain in my head, saw where all they might have to incur some additional costs, put that out there. R&D and regulation was something that clicked for me at the right time. I brought that up as well because I felt that could cost. Because obviously getting certifications invariably would cost the company some amount, which is the fixed cost is not going to recur in most cases. So in this case, before giving me the blanketing charge, he wanted to test whether I could name the different components of it. Successfully doing that, he was like, fair enough, let's not go into evaluation. This is the number. And then I proceeded with the calculations. So that is one complexity that can come in. Second complexity is on the profit side. You might not get the profit per unit. So again, as I said, market size could be given to you or it could be a guesstimate. Similarly, I'm trying to tell you what kind of deviations are possible. So now let's talk about profit per unit for a second. This next segment is going to take about 5-10 minutes. I'll just tell you what exactly it is. The kind of cases that you might see sometimes is they will say, we don't have data about our revenue and costs at the moment, or let's say they don't have the profit per unit, but at the same time, they want us to recommend what price we should put it. This ties in with not a different type of cases of pricing, but it's just a flavor of things that you need to keep in mind if you're ever asked, what should I price my product at? So a very simple way to visualize this is in this formula. Rohan, can you go back to the prior slide of this framework where we have this formula? Next one. Uh, One more. Yeah, thanks. So here, if you look at the first one, you have market size, market share, profit. You break profit into revenue and costs. So now your basic revenue per cost is going to be a price, and this equation helps you do a lot of things. So I know if any of you are making notes, just try making note of this part. So when you're talking about pricing, there are a couple of ways to view pricing. First is going to be a cost-based analysis. A client invariably at such a point when they can't quote a profit per unit because they don't know what price they should sell it, they will still be able to tell you the cost. If that is in place, you can put in various values of your price, which is nothing but your revenue per unit. Once you plug that in, you will start observing your payback period will change. I think that's quite obvious because profit in this payback period formula is revenue minus cost. The more you increase your price, uh, the more your profits will increase, and hence your payback period will decrease, and vice versa. You can work out the math of it later. So that is one approach. So one example of this is, let's say you have a particular product. You can tell instances like, if I price my product at $1, I can see that my payback period is about 5 years. If I price my product at $3, it changes my payback period. It reduces it to so much. And at the same time, if I make it $0.5, my payback period increases to 10 years. These are few aspects that goes from a cost-based analysis, wherein you use a benchmark payback period and explain what is the impacts of having a different cost. Because see, obviously your profits will increase, that's favorable, but you can't go out of boundaries. At the same time, you can't keep it too cheap as well, your product. So this is one way of analyzing if the price is in the correct ballpark. Second way is competitor based, which is pretty important. So I would not say that independent ways. You need to cycle through all of them. So you've done your cost based one. You can go through competitor. So you can say what are the price at which our competitors are announcing it. Are we having something Are we providing something that's very differentiated? In this case, as was clarified, there's not much variation in the kind of cables you can attain. So understandably, you have to price yourself very close to them. So then you say, hold on, let's just price it at the same level for now, and this is the kind of payback period. If I price it little bit lower than my competitors, my payback period increases by this much, but you can obviously say that might give us a competitive advantage. So that is something good that you can highlight over there. Then you have value based. This is not as relevant here, but you can say that, let's say if this is my particular kind of customer, let's say you're talking about a gadget, where should I price this new gadget? You can say that how much would my customer be willing to pay, and what kind of value this product is providing to them. Let's say it's Apple is trying to introduce a new product of AirPods. What are they getting from it? What is the people who are going to purchase it? What is their buying power? Where do they fall in? How much do you think they will feel feasible to buy it? So that was a value based approach. And lastly is going to be price sensitivity or elasticity. These are terms, again slightly complex, but basically how much would a customer's decision be affected by the price? Let's say we are putting a product out there. If I make my product cheaper, by, let's say, if I reduce the price slightly, will a lot of customers onboard me? Or if I make it slightly more expensive, will a lot of people drop out? So here again, it's all qualitative. There's no one right answer. You need to discuss with your interviewer and get it. But these are the multiple dimensions of pricing that you can think about, wherein you can conclusively come to a, I would not say conclusively, you can, with your interval, mutually come to a number that you can work with for the rest of the calculations. So this is just another pricing thing I wanted to bring up. It does come up in some cases, so it's good to be aware. Trying to just recap over them, the ways, the dimensions I mentioned for pricing is going to be cost-based analysis, where you see how the profits are affected, how your payback period is affected if it's a market entry case. Second is competitor based. Where are they pricing their product? If we can, should we price it equal? Do we have something good enough to charge a premium? If we charge it lesser, is it good that we can undercut them and get something? And what is the impact will have on the rest of the financials? Value based is going to be what value we're adding to the customer. Will they be willing to pay this price for us? This is more useful in a new product segment usually. And last is price elasticity. If we increase the price, how sensitive are our customers to it? Like, let's say if they don't care if the product is 1 or 1.5 because you are the only person providing it, or your quality is that much better, then you are free to do that. So these are just dimensions you need to keep in mind. You get an idea of the pricing model. So yeah, these are few complexities that can arise with market entry. Again, I do understand a lot of terms, but with practice, they will get comfortable for you all. So yeah, I think this is it from my side. Rohan, do you have anything else to add?
No, nothing as such.
Sure.
Like, does anyone have any questions or doubts? Like, please unmute yourself and ask. Like anything. And
I know, and if they don't have any queries per se, I'll just go over some do's and don'ts of this
yeah, yeah,
cases and we'll conclude it over there.
sure, sure.
Yeah, of course, if there's anyone who has questions, feel free to interrupt us at any point in time. Yeah, so moving on to do's and don'ts, this is not very specific to market entry, but I'll just go over what I have in mind. Firstly, don't jump to conclusions. As you might have even heard in profitability, you are trying to bottle down to a particular issue or see areas that need improvement in the client's business model. But don't stop there. Don't jump to conclusion that that's the only place. Like, let's say here also, if you're trying to understand barriers, you, with discussion with the interviewer, have understood that legal could be one barrier. Try and still iterate to everything and see there's no other issue. Don't, end your hypothesis very prematurely at any point in time. Just try and explore the breadth of it. The interview will tell you where to go in depths of it and what. So keep that in mind moving forward. Be careful of calculations in guesstimates and particularly market entry because of the numbers. It can get clumsy. Definitely go with assumptions of simplifying numbers and all of that, but keep your interview in a loop. Let's say you do some maths, number comes out to something like 901 or 910. Tell him for simplicity of calculation, I'm rounding it down to 900. Is that fine? Suppose if you have some 1.1 billion population, tell him, would it be fine if I just went with 1 billion population for use of calculation moving forward? That way, by doing this, you ask him that is this assumption feasible enough, and he knows your calculations are going to be based on this. So use assumptions, use them wisely, and at the same time keep your interviewer in the know-how that you are doing these assumptions. So that, let's say he's doing the parallel calculation to check whether you're on the right track, you all should not have different numbers. So keep them in the know-how, keep communicating, especially if everything's going to be virtual for you all as well. They can't see what you're working. They won't ask you for your sheet. So try and speak everything out. Tell them I'm here. These are the numbers. At this stage, these are my numbers. When I did the urban noodle split, my numbers are here. Because otherwise, it becomes very difficult for them to even validate what you're working with. Then obviously at any point in time when you start the case, give them an overall approach. That's why even if you noticed in my in the guesstimate slide, there's an overall approach. We're telling them this is what I'm trying to do, and each of them will be broken down into a lot of substuff. But the basic idea is this. So always give a brief overview and then move on. When you're doing even revenue cost, tell them this is revenue cost. Do you want me to break it down? Or they just give the numbers directly. Similarly, if you point out the different barriers, say these are many barriers. Legal has many barriers. They're like, okay, we understand, you acknowledge it, that's good. Or they'll say, okay, what do you mean by barriers? Then you explore it. So always give an overview, see where the interviewer is prodding you, and then only go into the detail and the gory details of all of those branches you could imagine. And always take cues from interviewers very carefully. Let's say you are assuming a 20%. He's like, I think it should be 30%. Unnecessary to sort of sit and argue with them. If they're giving you a hint or prodding you in a particular direction, best to accept it because they're trying to direct you to a solution in most cases, or at least get you back on track. You can discuss the rationale behind what you did to justify your thing, but always make sure you're taking any cues given by the interviewer. Let's say if he's trying to cut you short on a particular stream, do that. Don't go on speaking about it. Shift over to where he's trying to push you. So that is something to keep in mind. And of course, the main things, plan and speak, and you should be good. So yeah, I think that's about it. This would be the how much I'd have to share on this front.
Yeah, that was very helpful. Like, okay, this is not only like specific to market entry, but for any case interview. Like, I think proper communication and keeping the interviewer in the loop is really beneficial. Yeah. So, so if anyone has doubt, like, we can wait for 30 seconds. Fine. If no one has doubt, then so thanks Ashish for like spending time with us. It was a really helpful session, and with this live session, we finally conclude Consult 101. So thank you everyone for watching our videos. We really hope that we helped you guys in your case preparation. Also, like do practice the cases and guesstimates with your case group. That will really help you to get different opinions and think outside of the box in a way. So and in case if you yeah, thank you. And in case if you haven't been able to watch any live session or some recorded guesstimates, those are all available on our YouTube channel. So it's called Case Club IITM, and we also like in case of any feedback or doubts or anything, you can anytime message me or Ayush. So we will always be helpful. And if you guys are interested, we will be opening our manager position soon. So stay tuned and thanks.
And you can stop the recording.